Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Optimizing Nutrient Removal and Sequencing Batch Reactors. The webinar is part of the U.S. EPA's Office of Compliance Technical Assistance webinar series for plant operators, inspectors, and compliance assistance providers. My name is Peter Behor from the U.S. EPA's Office of Compliance. My colleagues Laura Paradise, Jake Gwynn, and I will be operating along with Brendan Held from Region 4. The webinar, this is our first time using Zoom Gov as a webinar platform, so we invite you to learn along with us as we navigate this new platform. Your audio is muted, so to ask a question, select the Q&A button on the bottom of your webinar screen, type your question in the box, and then select send. You may send your questions in the question box at any time during the webinar. The webinar is being recorded for future viewing. All of our past webinar recordings are archived on our website. Presentation slides, presenter bios, and other webinar series information will be posted in the chat box for you to download during the webinar. A copy of the presentation slides, Q&A report, and other handout materials will be emailed to all webinar registrants in about a week. Regarding certificates, starting with today's webinar, there will be a new certificate procedure. If you're watching this webinar today as a group under the name of one registered attendee, please type the first name, last name, and email address of all other persons in attendance into the Q&A box. All registered webinar attendees, along with the added names for the Q&A box, will receive an email certificate of attendance from Laura Paradise in about 1 week. Please discuss eligibility of continuing education credits with your state certification authority. Acceptance of certificates for continuing education credits is contingent on your organization's requirement, and EPA cannot guarantee acceptance. Thank you for being with us. Presenting today is Grant Weaver. Grant is a licensed wastewater operator and professional engineer. He holds a BS in biology and an MS in bioenvironmental engineering and completed postgraduate studies in environmental toxicology at MIT. Grant has visited and worked with the staffs of over 150 North American municipal wastewater treatment plants to realize significant improvements in nitrogen and phosphorus removal. With that, I will turn it over to Grant, unless Jake, you had anything you wanted to add to that introduction, who was helping us manage the webinar today.
I don't have anything to add, Peter. Thank you.
Okay, great. Grant, thank you for being with us in this part 2 of the series of 4-part series.
Thank you. Okay, I'm in. Thank you very much, Peter. And thank you, support team, which is massive, and all of you who are listening in, watching in today. Many, in fact, most of my examples today that I'm going to use are from Kansas. I'm a native of Kansas. I now live in Connecticut. It's a long story, don't ask. But this is my hometown, Wichita, with Century 2, the convention center in the foreground. So a little plug for good old Wichita. What are we doing here today? Well, we got a whole series going, right? Last month, talked about oxidation ditches. Today, sequencing batch reactors. And the end of March, all kinds of other activated sludge treatment plants. And kind of the context of all these discussions is milking nutrient removal out of plants with an emphasis on those really not designed for it. So kind of opening the door, I hope, to many of your minds to there's a possibility that you can get nutrient removal out of your facilities more than you're now getting with some operational changes. Hopefully incentivize and encourage that kind of thinking there at the treatment plant. Finally, and this one is also for operators, but for the regulators and the managers for the utilities, I want to do a little brainstorming. Might be a little bumpy. I hope it gets a little bumpy. Well, not too bumpy, but transitioning from, we have a real permit compliant mentality. Personal view is sometimes that gets in the way of moving the next step to excellence. There's a lot of, once we're permit compliant, let's stop there. And so I want to poke around at that a little bit and hopefully have some good discussion with all of these 3 sessions as background for that. That's the idea. I want to thank EPA for giving me the form, but let's not blame them. It's a great relationship where EPA allows people like me to speak without micromanaging what's said. I'm not making any policy statements whatsoever on behalf of EPA. All the opinions are mine, and we just need to, I want to make that clear at the beginning. So if you hear some dumb idea, blame me. If you hear something smart, credit EPA. They're the ones sponsoring this, but they're not giving you all the details. So there's a lot of folks at EPA, particularly Brendan Held is a fellow that found the funding to allow me to do this. Peter did the introduction, Laura and Jake behind the scenes. Many others over the years have been supporting this kind of effort, EPA and in states. But that little flash that came and went are the people that run and oversee the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 plants. Is that 5? That's 6 plants that I hope to be talking about today. And special thank you to all of them. So I'd like to start with a little cautionary note. Regulators, just because our A students are getting really high levels of treatment out of plants not necessarily designed for it, doesn't mean our B and C students can do likewise. So let's not take this as the bar, these discussions to which or the standard to which everybody would be held. Let's look at it the opposite way around as what we'd like people to achieve and see the opportunities that may exist. On the flip side, the operators, what I want you to think, well, my plant wasn't designed for, or we've only been able to do, fill in the blank. Maybe there's some new opportunities for you, and hopefully this series will give you some insights that may help you. So those are my little cautionary notes. I guess I should also say that I love comments and discussion. Brendan and Peter both have the green light, and more than that, they're encouraged to interrupt or bring up questions at any time. Now, having said that, there's a fair number of people who at least have tuned into this thing. So there may be way too many for us to handle during the course of live during the webinar. Anything that's get typed in as a question or comment, we'll follow up. We'll follow up afterwards. So today is sequencing batch reactors. The last session was oxidation ditches. I'm a little bit embarrassed to say that we've got a little bit of a work in progress, notwithstanding the fact that, yes, I've visited 150 treatment plants, had the pleasure to work with, well, most of them have been pleasures to work with the operators of those treatment plants. The work on SBRs has been more recent. Oxidation ditches, and I shared some numbers. Oxidation ditches not designed for nitrogen removal, consistently getting 3 milligrams per liter or less. I shared an example of an oxidation ditch not designed for phosphorus removal, biologically without any chemicals, getting 0.2, 0.3 average for like 3 or 4 years, I think. So we're not going to see those great numbers for SBRs. And I'm not sure it's all because of the technology. I think it's more, my experience is I'm more of a newbie in the SBRs, notwithstanding the fact that for over 25 years I've been running an SBR. But this experience with plants around the country getting particularly the phosphorus removal. So today, to get through the hour and a half of the timed webinar, and if it goes on further, I'm willing to stick on for a little longer if there's an interest. We're going to start out with a real quick overview of nitrogen removal. SBRs are designed to remove nitrogen, so we'll go through that pretty briefly. Very few are designed for phosphorus removal. So my emphasis is biological. I'm not going to be talking about chemical phosphorus removal. Much of the discussion today will be what are the opportunities and how are folks doing trying to get some of these SBRs to biologically remove phosphorus. Hopefully that will generate some discussion. To do that, we're going to go through case studies. Treatment plants not designed to remove phosphorus. How are they getting the level of phosphorus removal that they are, and what opportunities are they pursuing to refine that? Like I said, it's something of a work in progress. So a lot of these have started up really just in the last year, making an effort. And then, of course, we'll have breaks for discussion, but again, I invite discussion at any point in time. During the oxidation ditch discussion, the one that precedes this in the webinar 4 webinar series, there were some questions, some comments about ORP. So I thought I'd do some foundation work here and probably begin with a brief discussion of ORP, which is oxidation reduction potential. Me, I'm a big fan. Some people don't like it. Me, I really like ORP. ORP is an instrument that looks and acts a lot like a dissolved oxygen probe. The handheld ORPs, 10 feet away, they look the same as, many of them look the same as the same manufacturer's DO probe. Dissolved oxygen measures what? How much oxygen is in the environment. So in my little picture of Homer Simpson, who's a typical operator hard at work, seems like whenever I call up an operator, they're very busy. It's kind of a phrase we use around the house here. Very busy, very busy. So here's your operator, very busy at the control panel. The dissolved oxygen in his environment is pretty much the same as the dissolved oxygen in this spin class. So dissolved oxygen is how much is there. ORP tells you how much oxygen is being used. So in the operator's control room, it better be a positive number. You get in a negative and Homer would start getting kind of cold in there. But it would be in a low positive number. There's a low exchange of the ions that are measured for the ORP probe. So there's oxygen use because it's aerobic, but not a lot. Over here in the spin class, it's going to be a much higher number. So that's helpful in wastewater treatment. If we're measuring the dissolved oxygen, it doesn't really tell us what the bacteria are doing with the oxygen. If we measure the ORP, we can see how active the bacteria are. There's a lot of funkiness to the ORP. It doesn't translate perfectly from instrument to instrument, from plant to plant, even from time of year to time of year. So there are some issues with ORP. If you're one of those people that likes things to the third decimal point, it's going to drive you absolutely bananas. So be forewarned. It might be fun to watch you though. Just let us know. Nice little chart here that I stole from the internet, and it shows this ORP of 0. Anything to the left of that, that would be over here. You can't see that in a dissolved oxygen meter. They both arrive at 0 at the same place. So to the left, your DO meter is pegged out at 0. You're not going to know how strongly your denitrification environment is. You're not even going to have a clue if your environment is good enough for these two conditions for phosphorus removal. So not only does it tell you what the bacteria are doing with the oxygen, it gets you into territory for nitrogen and phosphorus removal that's very helpful. In fact, that you're handicapped if you're going solely with dissolved oxygen. I'm going to bounce into this a little bit more as I run through my quick overviews of nitrogen and phosphorus removal before I get into those case studies. But Brendan or Peter, if there's any questions or comments that you want to toss out now, I'll catch my breath. Otherwise, I'll move on.
I'll let Brendan if he sees anything, but what I have seen is we got a few hellos and one or two people liking the new platform, which is good to hear. And what I did fail to mention to everybody is one thing that is limiting in the new platform is that our limit is 1,000 people. And if you don't get on in that 1,000, even though we can register above that number, you will take it on. So being timely and early in future webinars will be to your benefit. But Brendan, do you have any other comments or questions you've seen come in?
Just a couple, and I think we might be getting to them a little bit later on, and we can, after we cover some of the basics, we'll come back to them.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thanks, Grant.
All right, now you made me all nervous, Peter. With how many people might be in, but we'll persevere. So we do have 3 polling questions throughout this webinar, so let's take a break for the first one.
Hopefully everyone is seeing the first question on nutrient removal fundamentals. I see people responding. And meanwhile, if there's anything anybody wants to add, Brendan or Jake or Laura, it's a good time while people are answering questions, the polling question.
Laura, I see a couple questions from people wondering if the slides will be made available. I think they'll be shared in the chat, but I wanted to give you a chance to correct that if that's not true.
Yeah, I'll answer all those in the question box. But yeah, I will be in just a little bit putting the handouts in the chat section. That's where you download them. I was waiting until a little bit further on in the webinar to make sure that most people had joined so that they have access. But yes, I will be uploading those.
Okay, I'm going to close the poll question and share it. We've had about 745 respond, sharing the results. Grant, are you able to see the results in this platform?
Yes, I am. This is really nice that I'm able to do that. Thank you. So we're just about right down a third of the people understand one or the other nutrients, or a third of them understand both, a third understand nitrogen, and a third aren't real confident. Did I get that right? A third understand both, a third understand nitrogen, but not so much phosphorus, and a third a little tentative about the whole thing. All right, well, regardless of your knowledge level, I hope that the following doesn't overwhelm or bore you. So we're just trying to balance it out here. So what I'd like to do is, last session, I spent a little more time on nitrogen than I planned to today, and these polling responses would confirm that that's probably a good idea. Nitrogen removal is well, let me put my video back on. There you go. Now you can look at my ugly mug. Lucky you. So nitrogen removal is a 2-step process. Actually, it's more than that, but the organic nitrogen converts to ammonia without really any operator input. Not a lot of process control of converting organic nitrogen, maybe that's in urea and other compounds, to ammonia. The ammonia I write here is ammonium. For the geeks, NH4 versus NH3. It's the form that we usually see in wastewater, and the majority of it are ammonia is ammonium. You don't really need to know that. The first step, however, to convert this ammonia or ammonium to nitrate, and that happens, as my little bullets say here, in an oxygen-rich environment. Not only do they not need BOD to grow, a very good process control tool is if you're removing ammonia in your aeration basin, so it's down to 1 milligram per liter or less, you can bank on the fact that your soluble BOD is very low. Because the BODs, the bacteria that consume the BOD, they're going to outcompete the phosphorus or the ammonia removing bacteria, and they'll be the first to grow and multiply. And if you've got a plug flow system and you track it through there, your BOD, soluble BOD will decline. And then as it declines, then the ammonia will start to decline. So good process control tool. You can get an ammonia reading in very short order, in minutes, and you know that your BOD is low. Bacteria are sensitive to it, but typically that's not the driving factor when you're trying to do total nitrogen removal. More often than not, it's this second step that is less consistent. And that's really because of that second item, the BOD, the organic loading, the inconsistency of the organic loading coming in makes it difficult to have a consistent nitrate removal in many treatment plants. So notwithstanding the fact that the bacteria are hardier in this second step, more often than not, I see this as the one that fluctuates. And except for occasional process upsets, or those of you who are in the business doing this know the factors that upset your ammonia removal may be storm flows. It's really the second one that requires more time to keep it in line. So going through the two-step process, going back to this ORP chart, which I like so much. So you can track the dissolved oxygen. I like to set a target for the ammonia removal, and I start with an ORP target of about positive 150. And then I adjust the dissolved oxygen to meet that target. And if the ammonia is consistently removed at that, well, then you can ratchet down that target. So you just need to find where does it remove, what kind of a level gets your ammonia removal, set your targets accordingly, and then adjust your aeration and what have you accordingly. pH for folks with soft waters is critical. You can get partway through ammonia removal, but once the pH drops below the number I've seen is 6.45, then you're going to have a lot of nitrites. It won't convert all the way to nitrate. Again, little to no BOD. Retention time, enough to get the job done. The second step, okay, you've created an interim, you've removed the ammonia, which is an acute toxin, but we haven't gotten rid of the total nitrogen, which, it's a chronic, I don't know that's a toxin, but it contributes to the blooms in our waterways. So we want to control total nitrogen more and more now. You're seeing it more and more in permits. To complete that is a low oxygen environment. So if you have an ORP, I usually start with a target of -100. I've seen plants that do quite well in that positive 100 number here, but more often than not, I like to see that number less than 0. The dissolved oxygen that's in the textbooks will tell you 0.3 or less, so really low dissolved oxygen. This is kind of interesting here. We're going to be consuming BOD now in a non-aerated zone. They're going to be breathing that dissolved oxygen off of the nitrate, which means we're going to get some free treatment. We put in surplus oxygen to get the ammonia removal. If we can cycle through or have a pre-anoxic zone, cycle through an air-off zone, we can actually ratchet down our overall oxygen requirement because we're going to lower the amount of BOD that's going into that aerobic zone. To do the math here, so if you go with the low end, the 5 times as much, that's the textbook number. If you have a concentration of nitrates of say 20, you're going to consume 100 milligrams per liter of BOD, growing bacteria, to remove nitrates in the absence of oxygen. It's going to turbocharge your aeration base and then make it so that you need to add even less air cycling through. Any questions on nitrogen removal before I jump over to phosphorus?
I am not seeing anything at the moment. Brendan, are you?
No, the questions so far are mostly related to phosphorus. So we'll cover that and then come back to these two. Thanks.
Here we go. Hang on. So before we get to phosphorus, excuse me, let's talk about the SBR. I mean, that is the topic of today's discussion. We're almost a half an hour in. How do they remove nitrogen? So this is a really lousy schematic, and notwithstanding the fact I sent my daughter to art school, and she didn't get it from me. So this is a top view of an sequencing batch reactor. The basins can be pretty much any shape. They can be square, they can be round, they can be rectangular. What are the shapes are there? I guess they can be something wonky with pentagonal if somebody would choose to design them that way. But let's, to go through how an SBR works, I think a side view is a better way to discuss it. So they're designed for total nitrogen removal. How do they do that? An SBR, those of you not familiar with an SBR, has no clarifier. Everything happens in one tank, in batches, sequenced in a reactor. Great name, sequence batch reactor. So there typically are two or more, not always. Sometimes it's one that's a flow through, but that's the exception. Typically two or more. And so while one or more is receiving flow, that's the influent, then one or more is idle. So while the one, let's do the active SBR, it's being aerated. As it's being aerated, the ammonia is converted to nitrate, right? So we're adding oxygen, the hydrogen ions go into solution, the bacteria are creating soluble nitrate out of soluble ammonia or ammonium. That happens while the air is on. The tank continues to fill. There's BOD in the influent. As that BOD comes in and there's no air, the bacteria fighting to stay alive, they're going to breathe the oxygen off the nitrates. And as they do, the nitrate will convert to nitrogen gas. Nitrogen gas literally bubbles out. You may see the bubbles. It may be real fine bubbles, may look like rain on a clear day coming out of the SBR. As nitrogen leaves the SBR and goes to the environment, the atmosphere is that we're breathing today is about 3/4 nitrogen, no matter where we are here on the planet, what elevation we are. So we're not polluting the environment by doing this. We're actually sending the nitrogen back home, I like to say. So that's the steps. So we're going to want to manage those air on and air off steps to optimize it. At the end of that active cycle, then the wastewater is going over to one or more of the partners there at the treatment plant. The first one, everything's turned off. While it's turned off, you get clear water on top and sludge on the bottom. Hopefully they're stacked up a little better than they are in my schematic there, but you get the idea. The clear water is decanted off the top. Some kind of device pulls the clear water off the top. That's treated wastewater. And some of the sludge is wasted into a sludge storage tank. That's going on while one or more of the other SBRs are going through that whole cycle I just went through. So that's the life of a sequencing batch reactor. From an operator's perspective, what we want to do is not set and forget the numbers. Too many folks have done that, and they're not getting optimal treatment. Well, let's understand how we should adjust our times so we can get work towards getting optimal treatment. We want cycle times that are long enough to make it aerobic enough for that ammonia conversion to nitrate, and then the air off cycle long enough while there's enough BOD around to get that nitrate to convert to nitrogen gas. We don't want the cycle so doggone long that we don't complete the 2 cycles, air on and air off, before the tank's filled up. Then we'll totally miss out on our opportunities. So we want the cycles long enough to get into aerobic conditions. Like, again, I like a target of positive 150 during the air on to start with, and then you refine it, and a target of minus 100 ORP when the air's off. Again, a target to start with. Now, something about oxidation ditches and SBRs that they have in common is there's a lot of water in these tanks. So in an SBR, this filled draw cycle is nowhere near half the volume of the tank. Might be a third, might be a quarter. So there's a lot of dilution in a more conventional flow through treatment plant. You can actually do profiles during different times and see what happens to the ammonia and nitrates. In an SBR, it's so diluted out, right? You're starting with 3/4 of the tank with a low ammonia and nitrate, if you got it dialed in. That extra amount that's coming in while you're filling it up kind of gets lost. So it's real hard to do process control by measuring the ammonia and nitrate. Better to do the process control on the environmental conditions. DO, better ORP. Hopefully that makes sense. So too short, your cycles don't reach your targets. Huge note here on the temperature. In the winter months, it can be hard for the bacteria to be active enough to get the kind of nitrate removal you've gotten used to in the summer. Don't make the mistake I did and don't be too tenacious and drive your plant septic. I did that once. Hope nobody from Connecticut DEP's listening, because they can come back for me for that probably. If the cycles are too long, you won't be able to treat all the wastewater through the 2 cycles. So just right, we bring it up aerobic enough to get the action, we bring it down anoxic enough. And these numbers are places to start. You know, you may find that you only need 5 minutes once you reach your targets, because the transition time is getting you where you need to be. Good place to start. I guess my message here is, if you're running an SBR and you're getting pretty good nitrogen removal, you might be able to get better if you periodically, and I don't mean every week, every few months, consider changing your cycles based on seasonality. Of course, they have built into these systems storm flow modes, which are really aimed to protect the solids as much as anything. Any questions on that? And then we will get into phosphorus. No.
All right, took a second on mute. I'm not saying anything unless Brendan is.
Yeah, actually, there was a question about storm mode that you were just mentioning, and how that might fit within the cycle scheme, and what you might need to adjust, or is that something that?
Say that again. I didn't hear the beginning, Brendan.
Oh, the question was, can you cover storm mode, which you just mentioned? So I don't know if you had more to add on that.
No, I really don't. Most of the systems nowadays have a built-in storm mode, and the whole idea is that if you went through your normal air on and air off cycles, your basin would fill up before you got all the way. So it kind of has a safety valve that shortens those cycles so that there's plenty of time for the solids to settle and you can decant them. It doesn't have that kind of a mode and you do have storm flows. I don't know, that's another chapter. That's something that needs to be addressed for sure. Anything else?
Hey.
Should I go into phosphorus?
Yeah, there's a couple more. That there were actually a bunch of nitrogen questions that came in right after
Okay.
the last break. but the influent, our influent ammonia, excuse me, is 30 milligrams per liter. Our recent nitrification is non-existent. Solids are settling fast, but there's a high TSS in the effluent. Do you have any thoughts about that?
What was non-existent?
Nitrification.
Well, the nitrification, so the ammonia coming in was 30 odd and they were not removing any ammonia?
That's what it sounds like.
Yeah, it sounds like they're septic. That's what it sounds to me like. So, yeah, there's something, or you got some big inhibitor for ammonia removal. So, there's my email there. So whoever that is, can you send me just a quick note and we'll follow up on the side, because there's something particularly weird going on in that. That shouldn't be the case. Could be pH. If the pH isn't high enough, and you're dropping the pH. But let's move on. What else do you have?
There's a couple questions about how DO and ORP relate. I'll read one as an example. It says, how does the plus 100, 200 correlate to milligrams per liter of dissolved oxygen, e.g. 2.5 milligrams per liter? We use a DO probe and it reads in milligrams per liter. What would a typical ORP look like?
All right, they don't. To my satisfaction, they don't. So the way I like to do it is invest in an ORP. And if you don't have much money, you can find a little pen size one that actually looks like a pen. It's a little twice as big around maybe, for $100, $150. Better, you can get a probe that's interchangeable with your DO probe for about $1,000. Even better, some of the meters will hold both, and so you can do them side by side. That's the best one. But what you're looking to do is set your ORP target and then figure out what dissolved oxygen gets you there. And then once you figure that out, run your process on the dissolved oxygen more often than not. Why? Because the ORP kind of follows, it lags, right? Because you're adding the dissolved oxygen, the bacteria are starting to respire more and more. And then eventually they get to the point where they're respiring at your target rate. But that's lagging 10, 15 minutes behind the DO. So you can overdose DO if you get too anxious to try to boost it all up. So figure out where your ORP is and how you get to that with dissolved oxygen. Set your DO times and settings based on that. You know, you don't do it in 5 minutes. It's a dance, and it takes you weeks to figure it out the first time, and then from then on it gets a lot easier.
All right, and there are a couple more, but I think maybe we'll save those for the discussion at the end. If
yeah, we're going to need to move on. Okay, thanks. Phosphorus, it seems to be bigger interest in that. So phosphorus, I did briefly talk about that phosphorus and the oxidation ditch webinar. We're going to get into a little bit deeper today. I've got webinars that are full day on phosphorus, so we're giving it the real quick overview. Bacteria that remove phosphorus are fussy eaters. They call them volatile fatty acids. The food they like to eat, by analogy, is the panda bears at the National Zoo are very fussy eaters too. They're like cuddlier and cuter. Well, they're not cuddly. They're cuter than volatile the phosphorus removing bacteria. It's both the same. If you don't have volatile fatty acids, the phosphorus removing bacteria are not going to grow. Peter, your mic's on. I don't know if you know that. So the first step is to create the food for the volatile fatty acids, and that happens in septic conditions. Well, septic conditions are below a DO of 0, okay? And the DO probe doesn't go into negative. So we need septic conditions. I like to target from -200 to -300. It can be -400. It depends upon the water chemistry. If there's a lot of sulfur in the influent wastewater, you get down to -300 and it's going to start to get smelly. If there isn't a lot of sulfur, it can go to -400 or even more negative. Be very septic conditions with little odors. Depends upon the water chemistry. Look at this one. Now we're really going to be BOD limited. We're trying to do both nitrogen and phosphorus, and we have a great pre-treatment program and really effective primary clarifiers. Very few SBRs have primary clarifiers. In fact, in my experience, I've seen 0 that have primary clarifiers. But so we need the BOD for phosphorus removal. A lot of BOD for phosphorus. Typical influent phosphorus might be 6 or 7. A couple parts are used to grow the bacteria. So if we want to remove 5 milligrams per liter of phosphorus biologically, we might need 100 to 125 milligrams per liter of BOD for that. So we need an environment that's just like a septic tank, something short of anaerobic digestion. If you're fully anaerobically digesting these little VFAs, they're the acids and the acid alkalinity ratio. They're a sour digester. If you have an anaerobic digester, you want none of these. You're converting them to methane gas. So we want a sour digester, kind of fixed on the word septic now. I think people can relate to that. Second, also in septic conditions, the bacteria that remove phosphorus, and the smart people call them PAOs, phosphate accumulating organisms, they're going to eat this candy, the volatile fatty acids, the ribeye steak, and they has to happen also in septic conditions. So we've created the food, and then we're bringing the bacteria that eventually are going to go back in the air under aeration conditions, the same bacteria, either in the same tank where you create the volatile fatty acids or in a different tank. They need to come together so that the phosphorus removing bacteria can eat that candy, that volatile fatty acids. Now, it is candy, and many other bacteria forms prefer it. Many other bacteria forms will eat hamburger, they'll even eat salad, but the phosphorus removing bacteria will only eat this candy, the volatile fatty acids. So if it's an engineered facility, there's a lot of thought into how do we block out the other forms from eating these volatile fatty acids that we've worked so hard to produce. So they're going to energize the phosphorus removing bacteria. We're in the same place here. We've got fermentive conditions, almost anaerobic. A lot of people call it anaerobic. I like the word septic. Same kind of conditions. The nitrates will outcompete the phosphorus, the nitrate removing bacteria. So a lot of plants, that's an issue. There's a lot of tricks to get around that. We'll kind of wade into that a little bit here today. Great process control tool. You know that this environment is doing what you want, that you're creating the volatile fatty acids and that the bacteria are eating the volatile fatty acids, the right bacteria, the phosphorus removing bacteria. If the soluble phosphorus coming out of this environment, this tank, this zone, is about 3 times what it was going in. If it's 5 times as much, you've got a digester. You're killing bacteria, they're dying, they're releasing phosphorus. If it's the same as what came in, they're not getting energized phosphorus removing bacteria. So the first step the second step in phosphorus removal is put more phosphorus in the solution. Pretty backwards, but nature's playing its games with us here. Then the third step, and hopefully the final step, would be these energized bacteria. It's kind of like body fat. It's like old Grant here, now that I'm on the dark side of my life here, that the running has stopped. I'm not near as active, but my eating habits have not improved. So I'm putting on body weight. So the bacteria will put on their body weight in those first two zones. And then now that they're energized, they will grow and multiply, create new bacteria under aerobic conditions when there's a high dissolved oxygen. And through some miracle of nature, they pull the soluble phosphorus. I'm sure somebody can explain it to us all. I'm not that person. Can pull the soluble phosphorus out of solution. And then we end up with some bacteria that have a very high concentration of phosphorus jammed inside their wee little single cells. So this happens in aerobic conditions. And I want to bring your attention over here to the right. Look at that. If we're nitrifying, if we're removing ammonia, we've got enough air to do the phosphorus removal. So once again, if we're monitoring ammonia in our aeration basin, that's telling us the BOD removal is happening. If we're getting low ammonia, doesn't tell us we're removing phosphorus, but it tells us that we have, at least as far as dissolved oxygen, an adequate environment. This is a real nut here, maintaining a pH. And I've seen facilities where the pH, the actual pH I've seen, that's the light switch, is 6.8. So if the pH drops to 6.7 for one day, typically the biological phosphorus removal for that day stops. Gets back up above, the biological phosphorus removal will return. If it stays too low, too long, the phosphorus removal bacteria die off, and they're kind of slow growing little critters. It may take you a month or 6 weeks for it all to grow back. So this, and I've also seen aerobic zones that are getting so little BOD. This is a Grant Weaver theory, and I'm just waiting for the train to arrive at the station and others to jump on with my theory, but maybe people are smart enough to know better. But I believe that if there isn't enough BOD going into that aerobic zone, that there's just not enough organic matter for the phosphorus removing bacteria to grow. And so that's part of the explanation, one of the explanations why in many treatment plants, folks are seeing better phosphorus removal in the winter than in the summer. There's a lot of other reasons, but this is one in the toolbox, I guess, to look at. So here we go. We want some kind of a septic conditions, either same 2 tanks or the same tank to create the food, and then to interact with the mixed liquor, the bacteria, a percentage of which are going to be the phosphorus removing bacteria. And then those bacteria, including that percentage that's the phosphorus removing bacteria, need to be moved into aerobic conditions. And as they do, they're going to pull all but an almost non-detectable level of soluble phosphorus out of solution, so that coming out of the aeration, there should be, if everything's dialed in, we're going to have a very low soluble phosphorus. Most all the phosphorus from a practical standpoint will be in and with the mixed liquor, which will be in the TSS going out the effluent. That's phosphorus removal in a nutshell. Brendan, you said you had some questions earlier. I don't know, you want to put some of those out there now, or should we jump into the case studies?
I'll jump in while Brendan's looking. Is the aerobic energized bacteria for phosphorus digestion need to be seeded? Is it special species?
That's a great question. I've never seen anybody seed it. I've never even heard of people marketing that. So having said that, maybe maybe somebody's in the business and does market it. But no, they're naturally occurring. And they're slow growing. So plants, as they start this up, folks that are itchy like me and impatient, it's a lesson in patience. It can be a month or two before you really start to see the impact. Other cases can happen sooner, but short answer is I'm not aware of any. If anybody is, please share with us. We'd like to hear that.
I'll ask one other and then I'll let Brendan. Is the non-aerated mixed fill cycle used to drive the DO down far enough to remove phosphorus before the aerated fill or react cycle?
All right, my $5 check is in the mail to you. We're coming right up. We're going to address that in the first case study.
Brendan?
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, I was talking on mute, not realizing it. Yeah, the earlier question was related to, do you have any experience with any non-reactive but soluble phosphorus?
Okay, so non-reactive, in my little world, the short answer is no. In my little world, reactive is the same as orthophosphate. Orthophosphate is the only soluble phosphorus I'm concerned with. People who have limits that are 0.2, 0.1 or lower, then there's other forms of phosphorus they need to worry about. But in taking a plant not designed for it and getting phosphorus out of it, if we can get down to 0.5, we're pretty doggone happy. Those other forms of soluble phosphorus, the so-called non-reactive forms, don't really come into play. So I am blissfully ignorant of that.
Great. I think the rest of these can wait till after the case studies. Thanks.
All right, let's go. Probably doesn't speak well to my character being so cavalier about that, but there we are. So most SBRs are designed for nitrogen removal. There are some that are designed for phosphorus removal. I've never visited one. I've kind of worked remotely with one once before. I think we're going to skip that today. We're going to talk about plants that are not designed for phosphorus removal. What the heck are your options? And if they're not designed for phosphorus, why are we talking about it? Because we're not people to say no for an answer. We're going to try to get phosphorus removal out of a plant not designed for it. And there's two strategies I'm going to put out there. And Peter, you hit the first one. Is it possible to take that air on, air off cycle, drive the air off cycle so low that you can create septic conditions and get some phosphorus removal? Yeah, I think it is. I'm just hearing of a plant in Kansas, Abilene, Kansas, my first example. I'm pretty sure this is what's going on there. And so we're going to get to that one here in just a moment. The second and much more likely way of getting phosphorus removal is to set up a side stream fermenter. Totally outside of the sequencing batch reactors that exist. Find a place where you can take some sludge, ferment it, turn the air off, a sludge holding tank, aerobic digester, turn the air off, let it cook long enough. I put down there 2 to 10 days. Those are just a place to start. Long enough to go into that -200, -300, create that septic conditions, create the volatile fatty acids, have in that waste sludge tank enough bacteria they can chow down on those volatile fatty acids, and then pump some of that waste sludge back into the SBR. This is the at the introduction where I said it's kind of a work in progress. So I'm going to be sharing examples of several plants that are doing this. I can't honestly tell you any of them have got it totally dialed in yet, but we're going to get there. And I can tell you that other technologies that I've been working with longer, and we'll have some examples in the next session of a plant that's a more conventional activated sludge, has a side stream fermenter, and is getting in that 0.2 to 0.3. Wasn't designed to, but that's what they're getting. So with that, let me continue. Let's go back to this first example, Abilene, Kansas. Like I said, this is a Kansas-centric presentation with the 5 of the 6 examples from Kansas. So here's an aerial view of the Abilene plant. Take that bar out of there. I'll put it back for a second if you want to see. It's about a 1.5 MGD plant, about 6,400 people in Abilene. Abilene is where the Eisenhower Museum is. Dwight Eisenhower is from Abilene. Been there a few times. Got 4 sequencing batch reactors, and then we have 2 digesters in the middle here. You can see the turbulence here. That means it's being aerated, these 2. You can see static conditions here. Looks to me like this one's in the settle mode, decant mode. This one's got some color, so it's probably in an anoxic mode, getting some mixing. 2 devices in here, aerator mixer in the middle, and these I suspect are floating decanters. So they go through the cycles. We can see 2, maybe even 3 cycles here. Definitely these 2 are being aerated. This might be an anoxic mix, and this is very likely somewhere in the settle decant cycle. So what did Abilene do? Abilene found that during the air off cycle, they were getting septic enough. Now, I'm going to tell you that many of these plants mix during the air off cycle, call it anoxic cycle. But if there's no mixing, you're going to stratify. You're going to have a sludge blanket at the bottom to be more compact. So the bacteria in a smaller place, so they're going to pull the oxygen out of that smaller place faster. It's going to get septic faster. You can create, theoretically, you can create septic enough conditions during that air off cycle that in the sludge blanket, there's some VFA productions, creating that candy. And of course, there's bacteria everywhere in there. So as soon as it's created, some form of bacteria is going to want to consume it. So if you have very low nitrates in the wastewater, then the phosphorus removing bacteria will have a chance. Now, what Abilene's done in the last year or so the good folks tell me there, and by gosh, I got to give credit to them. So G.D. Height, Kevin Clark, and Lon Schrader, they found, or they believed, that during their settle cycle, the phosphorus that they had so nicely tied up in bacteria was getting re-released. So they were going all the way through the process, getting these bacteria chock-a-block full of soluble phosphorus. They sat so long in the sludge blanket while they're getting ready to decant that they released some, they started to digest and die off and release some phosphorus. So they shortened their settle time so that it was long enough that they had a nice clear water on top and sludge on the bottom, but not so long that it sat there for hours and the sludge at the bottom started to re-release the phosphorus. They also did some adjusting of the air-on cycle to give it a little more of a boost during the air-on cycle, make it a little more aerobic, again with the idea they didn't want to get that re-release. And here's some of their numbers that they were able to produce with that treatment plant. So you can see there's no nitrates, all right? So if there's no nitrates, there's no competition for the volatile fatty acids, the candy. When you have everything going on in one vessel, this is really key. And you don't see total nitrogen numbers that low very often. That's a really excellent number. And it's not because the influent is low, right? So you can see the influent's almost 40. Abilene also has a very high influent BOD. The BOD is averages 390, almost 400 milligrams per liter. A lot of soluble BOD coming in. Phosphorus coming in is pretty darn high at 9. If there's no enhanced biological removal, you can typically count on removing 1.5 to 2 parts. That all gets used up to make new cells. So the remaining 7 parts here, 6 of those remaining are somehow getting removed. and it's being done biologically. They're not adding any chemicals at all in Abilene. So their trick was to create the environment, remove the nitrates so there's no competition for the candy, the volatile fatty acids they produce, have long enough, static enough air off conditions where they create an environment to create the volatile fatty acids, packed in with biology, with bacteria that could consume it, and then minimize the re-release as they get into the decant and final effluent cycles. Now, Kansas has a target. Consider them mean or consider them nice for letting everybody know, depending upon which side of the fence you're on. Since they pay me to do work, I consider them doggone nice. But they have a target of 10 total nitrogen and 1 total phosphorus. Every plant in the state knows that it's coming. It's kind of like in Jaws where that shark tail's coming out of the water and you hear the boom, boom, boom. All the people in Kansas know that whether they like it or not, there's going to be a 10-1 limit somewhere in their future, and folks are taking efforts now to reduce it. Abilene's done it. They're at 1.01. Here's a little chart showing the nitrogen. You can see the wintertime total nitrogen is higher. Why is that? That's because the nitrates are harder to get rid of in that colder water, right? Mention that. Very common in SBRs. This is pretty dramatic. And then this last year, the last couple of years, they've really been getting a handle on that. Phosphorus, again, I think there's coincidence. There's a reason why the phosphorus is going lower as that nitrogen is going lower. But great work there and a good case study. Not doing anything on the side stream. It's the only plant I know of that's an SBR that's getting anything like this happening inside the SBR. If others have similar experiences or know of them, please send me a note. My email address will come up again. Please jot it down, send me a note. Any questions or comments on this? I think we're at the end of this one. And then we also have a polling question. So maybe you want to put the polling question up, and if there's any comments, we can do that while the poll's up.
I'll put the polling question up while Brendan asks you the questions.
Okay.
Right. Did you, I'm sorry if you showed this already, but did you see the effluent ammonia in Abilene?
I did not break out the ammonia in Abilene. I can't swear to it. I'd have to get out of this program, and no, I'm not going to do that. But I gotta believe it's non-detect in 0.1. It's very low. If anybody from Abilene's listening in can kind of send Brendan the note, then he can update that and confirm it.
All right. And what can you do if you have an SBR with a low BOD influent in the range of 20 to 100 milligrams per liter?
Okay, let's Peter, I'm not seeing the polling question. Is it up?
It is failure to upload. I keep playing with it. I'll play with it.
All right, like you said, we're new to this. This is new to us, and
there is a
we did pretty good though. Yeah.
Technical difficulty.
Technical difficulty. So if there's a real low influent BOD, it's just plain problematic. Nitrogen and phosphorus removal, it's all about the ratios. It's that you can have, Abilene's a great example, the influent total nitrogen is fairly high, but there was enough BOD to drive it. So if there's really no ammonia in the influent, therefore then you're not producing many nitrates, therefore you don't need to denitrify, you don't need that BOD. But weak influence is a problem. You're going to have to address whatever the source is, the INI that's producing such a low number, or it's a fact of life in the nutrient removal world. If there's too little BOD, you're out of luck. You either create it by creating some by shooting it back from what you digest, or you just have poor nutrient removal. Lousy answer, sorry.
No, That's good information. And what sensors are being used at the Abilene plant, and what kind of sensors would you recommend for an SBR plant in general?
I don't know what sensors there. I have my favorites, and that's one of the deals I made with the EPA in doing this, is they're really not getting into the brand name business. But again, if anybody wants to email me, we can do that one-on-one.
Sorry, I guess maybe what type of process control measurements, maybe if you want to discuss that, that'd be.
Okay. Well, I go with the same, go with my ammonia removal. That's what these things are designed to do. And then if I can, I would play with not circulating the wastewater during the anoxic cycle. Now, some SBRs dump the influent into the top of the tank. Those are harder to deal with. If that was the case, I'd look to create a chute and push it down to the bottom. Others actually have a buried inlet in the bottom. That's the ideal, obviously. And the more diffuse it is, then it's going to stir up the blanket the least. Those are the types of units that are going to have the best chance of driving into the septic enough conditions for phosphorus removal. You let that blanket compress and have the BOD come into that compressed blanket. It's going to drive the DO, the ORP more negative or lower faster. Hopefully that makes sense. All right.
Thank you. And then I'll let Peter launch a poll, and while folks are reading that over, there were a couple people who chimed in about ammonia performance at Abilene, and apparently last month it was 0.11. 2021, an average of 2.3 with a low of 0.1 and a high of 15.4. We don't know what happened that month.
All right, so it's getting on average lower, and that's what's really helping everything else, I think. So Peter was able, through the magic and probably some words spoken that we were fortunate we didn't hear off screen.
Well, we had to enlist Jake to actually post it, so it's up and we'll close it in a minute or so now. We'll give the majority of the people to respond to it. We'll give people another 10 or 15 seconds before we close it so we can move on. All right, I'm going to close in 5 seconds, guys.
Got my pen ready. I want to write these numbers down.
So you should see it now, and it should be shared with everybody. So I'll let you, well, I hope you see it. Jake, hopefully my system's not allowing me to manage it, but Jake is doing it.
I'm seeing it, so I assume others are too. All right, great. This is good information for me to take into that fourth session, because I'm going to be going to that 2%er. That's and the 2 and the 8%ers at the very beginning. Since the majority don't feel that way, maybe we'll have some lively discussion. So please join in and let's get into that. Let's discuss that. So thank you very much. All right, so time that's remaining, I want to talk about side stream. Then I think I have more case studies queued up than we can get through, and that's okay. They're kind of redundant. It's just multiple examples of folks that have taken their waste sludge, a percentage of it or all of it, fermented it, and then send a percentage of these bacteria, the same bacteria you wasted after hold them off to the side for a week or so, back into the SBR. The idea being that while they're in that side stream condition, while they're out of the SBR, they're going septic. In that septic environment, we're creating volatile fatty acids, and the volatile fatty acids are being consumed by the phosphorus removing bacteria, which you got to cultivate and grow, per one of the earlier questions. And then with time, you kind of are reseeding your own plant and developing a good population. There's that same top view I did before. Here's the same side view I did before. But now we're going to look down here in the sludge storage tank. I pointed to my screen. I guess that didn't help you much. In the sludge storage tank, if it's an aerobic digester, we can turn the air off. If it's a massive tank and we've got another smaller tank somewhere, maybe we'll send it in the smaller tank and allow the volatile fatty acid production. Concern about a massive tank or holding it too long is in a digester, you're actually killing bacteria, microbes anyway, and as they die, they're going to release phosphorus into solution. So you don't want it to sit too long. There's a not long enough and there's too long. We're looking for the ideal, and that's kind of a hit and miss to find that number. So we're going to send some of this waste, the waste sludge, some or all of it, into a low oxygen environment, no oxygen, maybe aerate it once a day just to mix it up a little bit. And quickly go septic again after you quit aerating. Create the volatile fatty acids. Of course, the volatile fatty acids will get consumed by the bacteria that are in that waste sludge. Now, once there's a population that's developed, now you've got energized phosphorus removing bacteria. We just need to pump some of them back in to the SBR. So this is the work in progress that a number of plants that they're drinking my Kool-Aid are working on and having different amounts of success with. So that's what I thought I'd close this with, is sharing some of those stories. Somewhat humbly, because I wish we were getting the 0.5, 0.3 numbers. And you'll see that we are, here I take credit, they're doing all the work, that they are at least intermittently. So that's the concept. And I want to begin with a plant in Connecticut. What the heck, we got to step outside of Kansas for just a moment. East Haddam, it's a real quaint little New England town. This is the Opera House and the swing bridge, which is really a cool thing. It actually pivots right there. It's not a drawbridge, it pivots. This is a navigable river, it's tidal river. The locals love and hate that bridge. The treatment plant is tucked away in the little airport. The airport's right down the river here to the right. And you can see the runway. And the treatment plant is inside two buildings. It's only a 55,000 gallon per day design treatment plant. So there isn't really anything to look at. So here's some numbers. Pretty high influent total nitrogen, 90+% removal of total nitrogen. Here we do have the breakdowns, consistently good ammonia removal. TKN, which would be the difference between that 1.8 and the 0.3, which is 1.5, if my arithmetic's correct. That would be organic nitrogen, not much chance removing that. The majority of the nitrogen is nitrite. Can't see over there. I don't know if it showed up underneath the right there. Darn it, I'm going to move this. Yep, okay. So the total phosphorus is averaging 2 milligrams per liter, but the influence 7. So we're getting biological phosphorus removal. They at East Haddam. And I got to give credit to, my company's been running this plant for 25 years, but I got to give credit to Zach Dutton. I don't know, Zach, if you tuned in, Joe Barros and Catherine Neeland are the three that are running that plant. Influent BOD is kind of moderate, which is kind of surprising, frankly, because this is a grinder pump collection system. Every one of the 100 housing units and businesses are served by a grinder pump. So there's no real chance for infiltration or inflow. Here's some nitrogen numbers over the years, and then the phosphorus numbers. So wastewater, I guess I didn't describe very well what's going on there. The phosphorus removal that's occurring is happening because the sludge is wasted into a sludge holding tank. It's decanted, and when it's decanted, the staff is purposefully sending a little extra solids back into the SBR, but it's kind of random. It's not being timed to what day it's decanted, what day the sample's taken. All these samples are grabs, are twice a month. These bar graphs are the average of 2 twice per month results. We're going to dial this in. We talked about this as I was preparing. I did a dry run of this webinar with the folks that I work with, and we decided we need to more consistently waste sludge and more consistently manage this and see what we can get. But you can see at times tremendous numbers, well below 0.5, and at other times unbelievable high numbers. Here, this one's poking, the 3 of them are poking through the roof here, 10 milligrams per liter, when the influent was averaging 7. So we're getting too much release at times, and at other times we're dialing it in. So when I visit facilities, when I work with facilities, and when I'm managing facilities, what I look for is what are the best we're doing. Let's understand how we're getting these best. Let's understand how we're getting the worst. And let's do less of this and more of this. Now, East Haddam does not have a total phosphorus limit. We don't ever anticipate having one. It's discharging into the Connecticut River, which is a large river, and it's actually tidal. So it's tidally influenced anyway, as far inland as East Haddam. So for water quality permitting requirements, we don't ever anticipate a phosphorus limit, but I think for the science, I kind of need, it's close at home, I need to do a better job. So with all those embarrassing caveats, maybe I ought to move on to the next example. While I'm doing that, obviously, Brendan or Peter, if you want to chime in, please do. But here's Osawatomie, Kansas, a facility, pretty interesting folks there. Osawatomie, Bruce Hurt, really, it took a major effort to try, here, let me get this bar out of the way. So sequencing batch reactor here. We got an EQ basin here, kind of a lagoon, mini lagoon. Got some water that goes through a clarifier from that. But over here is the digesters. So the sludge from the SBRs is wasted over here to the digesters. They're aerated, or they historically were aerated. And then, I don't know why, but Bruce let me talk him into the idea of dropping a submersible pump into one of the digesters, running that with much less air, so that sure, he could aerate it every day to keep it mixed, even aerate it for more than an hour at a time, as long as long air off cycles to create the septic conditions. Submersible pump, you can probably see this white line. I think I have another slide where it's zoomed in on it. It's much blurrier, but the white line shows. So he strung a PVC pipe across the landscape. Let me go back to this one, and put a timer on it, and was pumping some percentage of, trying to get about 10% of the sludge he wasted back into the influent splitter box of the SBR. It was indiscriminate, so it would come in not necessarily to the SBR tank that was being aerated, kind of any point in time during any cycle. It just would pump in because the SBRs were running on its own timers, and this pump was run on a certain time of the day. It would pump a given number of minutes, which was an estimate, trying to bring about 10% of the waste sludge back. Now, when Bruce set it up, he set it up overland. You can see that. Kansas, it gets cold in the winter, not like in New England for the long hauls, but still cold enough that it would have frozen. So he only ran it during the summer and only for a couple of summers. So here's some of the results. Day in and day out, pretty low numbers. Influent already pretty low. One could arguably say that getting from 2 to 1, that could be no biological, enhanced biological. A lot of that's just going into building new cells. Influent BOD is very low here. Here's like the questionnaire. So low BOD, low influent nitrogen, okay. A percentage of that influent nitrogen is going into building cells. If there was a higher BOD, I'm sure that this number could be driven lower. But a goodly percentage of that drop from influent nitrogen of 20 to 7 is just going into building new cells that goes out as waste sludge. You know, living organisms are 10 to 12% nitrogen. By dry weight, they're about 1% phosphorus. So some of that's getting used just to make cells.
Hey, Grant, can I give you a time check?
Yeah.
We're about 2:23, so coming up on the 90 minutes. Wanted to maybe push you along. I know that we'll probably go a little bit over and let people know that they want to stay longer, they can. But,
Yeah.
All right, I'll leave it at that.
Okay, yeah, I'm happy to go longer, but let me wrap this up and then let's just go into Q&A because the other examples are very similar. We're seeing periods of great phosphorus removal and then periods of not so great phosphorus removal. While the trend here at Osawatomie has been an improvement because of a greater effort being paid because of recycling the sludge, but still not quite where we want, right dancing at this 1 milligram per liter, which is the state's long-term goal for all of its treatment plants. What I do want to point out is that the summer months, if you compare these summer months to the previous 2 summer months, you can see that once this effort was started, notwithstanding the periodic plugging of the pumps and the fact that he couldn't do it in the winter, it seemed to have really ratcheted things down. So I'm going to hang on to that. We're going to keep working with SBRs, and we're going to find a way in a day, and maybe a year from now, 2 years from now, I can come back and share some really more exciting stories. Right now, it's more in the opportunities, I think, department. Maybe what we ought to do, Peter, is do the last polling question. And while you're doing that, if there's any questions, I can do that. And we'll just see where it goes. How's that?
That sounds good. And I'll do a little summary of your next webinar and a couple other things after a few questions are asked and the poll's done.
All right. And while you put the poll up, I'm going to scroll through here. So go right ahead and put her up there, and then. More technical difficulties.
I don't know if it came up or not. Let me know. Let me know.
There it is.
I think that has to do with, fortunately, that we have Jake helping us here.
Thank you, Jake.
So go ahead, Brendan, with whatever questions you got. And you are mute if you are trying to respond.
Thank you. My whole window disappeared for a moment there. One of the first questions we got was from a utility in McPherson, Kansas. They've been running their SBRs since 1989. Their problem is with phosphorus-laden supernatant off their aerobic digesters. Do you have any thoughts on how to manage that? They have no
Yeah.
problem with nitrogen removal.
Okay, yeah. Both aerobic digesters and truly anaerobic, the closed lid, floating lid type digesters. Their purpose in life is to destroy some of the bacteria cells, and as they die, ammonia is released into solution and phosphorus and all kinds of other junk. So digested sludge almost always contains a high level of phosphorus, 10, 20, 30 milligrams per liter of soluble phosphorus. So the solution is, and more and more plants in Kansas are trying this, and I'm going to give an example next month. It's going to be actually is it the last day of March, of a plant also in Kansas, not an SBR, that instead of their digester just sending back supernatant, we're allowing the digester to go septic. So we're cycling the air. They are cycling the air. This is Parsons, Kansas, cycling the air on and off. And they're actually blowing some of the solids out of the digester that's gone septic back into the aeration tank. In their case, it's the Schreiber design of aeration tank. And that's returning the energized bacteria. So I didn't catch what that was. I think you said it was Mission, Kansas. So Mission's a Kansas City suburb, if that's the community you mentioned. So if they run your digester instead of being aerobic all the time, if you can let it go anaerobic enough, and then you can send some of that sludge back into your SBR. Of course, you'll have to waste, it's going to come back a little more into the SBR. You're going to have to maintain your mixed liquor the way you want it. You should start to reseed it, and in a couple months, you should see some biological phosphorus removal. Please, I'll put up my email address. Mission KDHE is paying me to do a lot of work in Kansas, so let's talk some more. But there's a strategy. All right, we got polling here.
It looks like actually that was the
Yeah, it
same
looks
question
like
we had last time.
Jake, can you put up the third polling question, please? Oh, no, Jake is having the same problem as I did with one.
I apologize, guys. I've been trying for a while. I don't know what's going on. It's not letting me. And I'm trying to access the backside of Zoom Gov to see what's going on, but I'm kicked off of the network completely on the backside.
Jake, why don't I let you play with that? I'm going to give like end of webinar quick update, and then Grant has agreed to answer some additional questions.
Sure.
So that we'll do a unofficial end or official end of the webinar. However, Grant will still be doing a few questions post.
Sure, I'll try to get this up as soon as I can.
Okay, yeah.
I apologize for what's happening.
No, just kick it out when you get a chance. If it works, if it doesn't, then we'll chalk this up to a learning experience through our first use of Zoom Gov. So I want to thank everybody for attending today. We had over 900 attendees, and butting up against our 1,000 person limit. We do caution people to sign on early for future webinars because the new platform is limiting us to 1,000, which is great that we're getting that many people. We had registered over 1,300 people. So, it's not a given that you will get on next time if you're not on early. So please remember that. We don't want anyone to be disappointed. The next webinar, as Grant had listed early, is March 31st, other activated sludge wastewater treatment plants, if I have the title right. we want to thank you, and I did enjoy reading that we have people from all over the world, actually from Ecuador and Guam and many of the states. So it's great to see that so many people are identifying their locations for others to see and feeling like a real community. I think with that, we just want to thank you with your patience for the first time us using this new platform, and we will improve on our polling questions, hopefully. Otherwise, I think everything went very smoothly, and hopefully you found this to be a platform that you are getting another good resource of information from. With that said, we will officially end, but we will continue. Grant has agreed to answer more questions. So I think that's all that I have to say right now, and thank you all again.
Yeah, so Brendan, if you have any questions or comments. Meanwhile, the polling questions that we were going to ask was to send your driver's license number, a credit card number, and your home address and social security number. So anybody, no, we're kidding. Okay, Brendan, you got any questions or comments?
Yeah, so just since we had that other poll question up once again, someone did ask anonymously, what is EPA's opinion on the options that were presented in that poll, as far as, you know, what level of flexibility operators should have. And at the risk of getting myself in trouble, I will I will note that I'm, you know, very low level peon in the organization. I don't dare speak for the whole agency, but I will speak to my own experience in the region. And that is, you know, I've been something of an evangelist for optimization, and I've discussed with our enforcement branch, you know, what their attitudes are, and everybody seems to agree that communication is key. And so, if you're going to be trying some of these things, just make sure that you're reaching out to your field inspector, whoever it is that's going to be writing the ticket if you're caught speeding. So make sure everybody's on the same page, that they understand what you're trying to do and that you're trying to get a positive outcome. And you know, some states are out in front of others in terms of what kind of leniency you might expect. So you know, we've even seen some permit language that requires facilities to try some of these things before they get a limit imposed on them. So and even that language includes instructions on how to report violations, so that it flagged it in the system that this was something that was related to optimization. So you know, your experience will vary depending on where you live and who you're working with. So that's my answer to that. And I'll turn it back over to Peter or Laura if they want to jump in here with anything else before heading to the next question. Hearing nothing, I will.
I'm sorry, Brendan.
Oh, go ahead.
I was muted. Just to reiterate, Brendan, what you were saying, we're not trying to set policy here. That's the big thing in this webinar. And Grant also mentioned that his views are not those of the agencies. And so we are speaking just generally at this moment, just to be clear about that. That's about it. You go ahead, Brendan.
Thank you. I appreciate you keeping me out of trouble. So next question related to SBRs and nutrient removal. What role does alkalinity play in nutrient removal? This plant offsets their low alkalinity by adding bicarbonate. Is this just giving bacteria a comfortable living environment, or is it something related to the process itself?
Okay, good question. So in softer waters that don't have a lot of natural buffering capacity, and in my 2-day classes, I put up a picture of a glass of ice water, and I try to draw the analogy between the ice cubes and pH buffers. So what we're trying to do is keep enough ice cubes in the glass so that the water doesn't go acidic if I'm kind of totally mixing everything. So for ammonia removal, we need the pH to stay at 6.45 or higher, or we're going to run into trouble. And a way to stay ahead of that, a way to keep that, is to add alkalinity. And then you can monitor the alkalinity, set a target for an alkalinity that will ensure that you don't fall down into that danger pH. For phosphorus removal, the pH even has to be higher. I've worked with a treatment plant in Massachusetts, soft waters, where they found that it was cheaper to add phosphorus removing chemicals. They use polyaluminum chloride pack than it was to add sodium hydroxide, caustic soda, nasty chemical for pH adjustment. So depends upon the price of the chemicals, but you need the alkalinity to, like you said, like the questioner said, to keep the bacteria happy. For nitrogen removal, you need even more alkalinity for phosphorus removal.
Great, thank you. So the question is, if phosphorus is removed in the sludge, do they still land apply it, or does it go somewhere else?
If it's removed in the sludge, it's still what?
Land applied, is it still land applied, or does it go somewhere else?
A great question. So, okay, so phosphorus removal is you're moving the phosphorus into the mixed liquor, which becomes the TSS, which becomes the sludge, right? So yes, as the sludge is removed from the plant, if it's dewatered in the plant, then that water is going to contain probably a high level of phosphorus as you dewater it. So that side stream will be high in phosphorus. If it's land applied, then you're going to have a higher phosphorus concentration in your sludge, which is advantageous up to a point. There are some Kansas communities that are starting to get concerned about their phosphorus limits on the land application. Kind of a unique discussion, foreign discussion for those of us like me in Connecticut, where all the sludge here in Connecticut's incinerated. So we don't land apply in Connecticut. So I'm pretty ignorant of that, but great comment. Yes, the concentration is higher in the sludge, which is beneficial, right? You have good phosphorus in the sludge. In some cases, I guess folks are starting to be concerned that can be long-term, can impact their long-term sludge disposal strategy. I don't know a way around it. If you chemically remove it, it's also going in the sludge. So that doesn't fix it.
Thank you. Do you have to take any special steps to avoid propagating problem bacteria like nocardia in your septic process that can affect settling?
Okay, that's a good question. Kind of let me go two paths down that. Many of the folks that are dialing in nutrient removal, SBRs, no matter what it is, they've run up their mixed liquor. They run higher than they used to. More bacteria seems to help them. I like to see a plant run with pretty much as much high a mixed liquor population as the clarification step, in the case of an SBR, your settle decant, will tolerate. Now, if you're going in and out of zones, aerobic to anoxic, SBRs kind of have an older sludge, so it doesn't dewater as well often because it's an older sludge. That's kind of common to older sludges. But SBRs typically don't have a lot of issues with filaments because they go in and out of those two cycles. Now, having said that, one of the big problems with SBRs is there's no place for the bacteria, things that the greases and what have you that float to the top of the tank. They can't go anywhere. And that's a problem for them. But typically, no. The short answer would be typically no, but there's always an exception. Typically, not only no, but typically strong aerobic, strong anoxic, even an anaerobic zone typically will help control filaments. Back in the day, pre-anaerobic zones were being installed. Been to some pretty big plants in Nashville, Tennessee, for example, where they put an anaerobic zone, as they called a selector. And the idea was to help select against filaments. So they purposely put it in. So hopefully that is enough mush there that no matter what your opinion was, you got an answer you can hang on to.
Not only that, but you answered the next question I had flagged, which was, is a dedicated upfront anaerobic zone also an option for biophosphorus removal in SBR systems?
They are, and there's a technology that has them. I've only worked with one. I've worked with it remotely, and they had a real problem driving it septic enough. And we worked with the manufacturer on that, who was super helpful. And I don't really know where they are with that, but yes, there are some SBRs that are being designed with an anaerobic zone at the front end. It's a good concept. I have very limited experience, and the limited experience I have is it wasn't working quite as well as everybody hoped, and kind of like my work in progress caveat at the beginning. We're gonna that's gonna be fixed.
Great, and that's another segue to another question, which is, do you have to provide any additional BOD during fermentation, or do you rely on bug bodies?
Yeah. Unfortunately, that's dependent upon the case by case. And if you have to provide BOD, of course, the first thing to do is to look for ways to create your own on site so you don't pay money for it. That would be probably in your sludge or non-SBR type facilities. I like to use the word detune your primary clarifiers. Maybe even take primary clarifiers out of service, let the sludge blankets grow a little bit, try to get more BOD into the biological treatment systems, and not removing in your primary clarification. So yeah, that can be a battle, and be creative, look for opportunities.
Oh, Grant, I actually muted you by mistake there. I'm sorry about that.
Oh, okay. You muted me.
Is that enough?
What the fuck? Okay, I feel it. All right.
No, but actually that said, there are not any other questions at this time that
Okay.
follow up with in writing. So
All right. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it, and I look forward to folks in the next month and really putting out the word for this discussion that we want to pick up where Brendan and was talking about, because different states have very different opinions on whether they increase their permit compliance observation while you're experimenting, or they actually encourage you to do so and write you a letter that was kind of almost a pass, that as long as you're making an honest effort, they promise to not enforce, to give you a pass on temporary violations from the state level. So we've seen a whole range, and I hope that discussion will emerge from that April 28th session. So thanks again. Thank you, Brendan. Thank you, Peter. Thanks, everyone.
Sure. Thank you, Grant. I'm just